Gladiator, starring Russell Crowe. Is there a more glorious phrase in Latin? No, indeed not. Unfortunately, we're not talking about that movie today. We're reviewing a different one. Oh yeah, that dramatic music, man. I had to let it play. I'm Ryan Bosling, the Drama King, and today I'm reviewing Gladiator 2. But this won't be a regular review where I just say if it's good or bad or what I think about it. I'm gonna be looking at it like a script doctor to see what went wrong with the script, and then I'm gonna give concrete examples of how to fix it. And this time around, I only have one thing to look out for, one fix for this movie that would make everything better. Who am I, and why should you listen to me? Well, I was a Nickel Fellowship quarterfinalist. Despite the name, it's actually a screenwriting competition run by the guys who do the Oscars. I have an MFA in creative writing and fiction. I've taken courses, university courses in screenwriting, playwriting. I taught English composition and literature. I took a lot of courses, workshops with lots of famous writers who won or nominated, like everything there is out there. And I've done lots of reading, writing, and editing of other people's work. And in this channel, I'm taking all I've learned from all these years, all this formal education and experience, and I'm looking at stories, as in TV shows, movies, and video games, and picking them apart at a technical level to say what went wrong with them and how to make them better. Or if it's really good, what makes it so good. Gladiator 2 was kind of interesting to me for several reasons. And one, over the years, I'd heard rumors that they were working on a sequel. And I would think about it and talk about it with other people. And everybody seemed to agree that it was ridiculous to make a sequel because the guy in the title, the Gladiator, Maximus, was dead and his story arc was completed. So how would you do a part 2 with him? How would you bring him back? Is it needed? Like the basic story concept of having a noble man, a noble general fight the emperor in the Colosseum for honor. Like it's so contrived that you can't really do it twice or it becomes silly. And so I'm going to answer the questions a little later about how you approach this and is it needed. And I'll talk a little bit about sequels and how well or how badly I thought this did at making a sequel to a movie that you really can't make a sequel out of, seemingly. The other interesting thing about this is that Gladiator is one of those movies that all dudes just love. I remember guys would use that war scene from part 1 where Maximus says unleash hell at the Gauls. They use it to like pump up when you're working out or like they're in the military training or you have like a football game, high school football game. They always play that scene, that war scene to pump everybody up. And guys liked it. And then this movie came out and I didn't see it because I wasn't too interested in it. I just thought it looked stupid. But other people had seen it and I asked them, oh, you saw it. How was it? And everybody would just kind of like shrug and, they seemed vaguely dissatisfied. And then everybody forgot about it. This isn't a movie that anybody talked about. And so I'm wondering, or I was wondering before I watched it, how did it go so wrong? Like to me, this should have been a movie like Maverick, Top Gun Maverick, that comes from a huge hit and is a huge hit again. Or it could have been even more, I think, now that I've seen it. It could have been a movie almost like Godfather or Apocalypse Now if they had approached it in a different way, and I'll talk about that later. I'm going to give a quick synopsis of the film. Then I'll do a review where I just say what I thought about it, if it's good or bad. Then I'll go into the key problems with the script, and then I'll give my solutions. 16 years after the first film, Rome is ruled by two emperors, Geta and Caracalla. Hanno, who is actually Lucius Verus Aurelius, the kid from part 1, and played in this movie by Paul Mescal, has grown up in exile for his own safety in Namibia. He has a wife and some sort of responsibility in the military. When the Roman army invades, led by General Cassius, played by Pedro Pascal, his wife is killed. He's knocked unconscious and taken as a slave. Forced to fight as a gladiator, he impresses businessman and gladiator impresario Macrinus, played by Denzel, who buys him and makes a deal with Hanno. If Hanno fights well for him, he will deliver General Cassius to him. where he can get his revenge for the death of his wife. Meanwhile, in Rome, General Acacius reunites with Lucilla, his wife, who's also Hanno's mother and the ex-lover of Maximus. And I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but Hanno is the son of Maximus. Both the general and Lucilla hate what Rome has become and plan an uprising with like-minded senators, using the general's troops to overthrow the emperors. They're just waiting for the troops to arrive. Macrinus impoverishes and entraps a wealthy senator by making extravagant bets with him on the outcome of a series of fights featuring Hanno. When Lucilla sees Hanno fighting in the Colosseum, she suspects his true identity and goes to visit him, where he reacts angrily and kicks her out of his cell, though confirming his identity. Lucilla decides she and Acacius have to enact their plan quickly to save Hanno. Unfortunately, they've been betrayed by their servant and the senator that Macrinus entrapped earlier by gambling. The rebellion is put down, and Acacius and Lucilla are arrested. Macrinus advises the emperors to have Acacius fight Hanno to the death in the Colosseum, because he's too beloved by the people to simply crucify him like a lowly criminal. In the Colosseum, having surrendered to avoid fighting, Acacius reveals to Hanno that he knows his true identity and that he loves Lucilla and would have died for his father, Maximus. Emperor Geta decides Acacius must die, but Hanno also puts down his weapon. Geta has Acacius killed by the Praetorians, which sparks rioting. Macrinus uses the rioting to convince Caracalla that Geta will lie to the crowd about him to rile them up and attack him. Macrinus helps Caracalla attack and kill Geta and is made consul as a reward, along with Dondus, Caracalla's pet monkey, and the best character in this movie. Macrinus takes control of the Praetorian Guard and advises Caracalla to have Hanno fight to defend his mother in the Colosseum against an impossible number of Praetorian guards. Before the fight, Hanno sends word to Acacius' army via a doctor, revealing his identity as the Prince of Rome and telling him to advance on Rome. The doctor also gives Hanno the keys to the cells. The gladiators break free and rush into the arena, but Macrinus kills Caracalla in the confusion and shoots Lucilla dead before Hanno can free her. Macrinus rides to the front of his Praetorian army to confront the rebel army, but Hanno catches up to him. They fight, one-on-one, between the two armies, and Hanno kills him. Hanno invites the soldiers to join him in rebuilding a nobler, more just and honorable Rome. They roar their approval. He returns to the arena and touches the sand and asks for his father's guidance. So what did I think of the movie? Well, I thought overall it was bad. Or maybe not so much bad, it's just so mediocre that it was bad, if that makes sense. Essentially, the movie felt really long and boring, with characters and a situation that was never really focused or fleshed out. And so it felt like a bunch of characters kind of muddling through a series of actions and never cohered into anything. But the interesting thing about the movie to me is that it has all the right elements that you need. It has the right characters in the right situations. So what I mean is, it seems like the writer knew that he needed a lead character who was kind of tragic but charismatic. And that's what Hanno is supposed to be. I'm not saying it succeeds. But that's what he is. That's what the movie wants him to be. And he wants revenge for his wife. So it's like a good setup, right? Then the movie knows that he needs a friend on the inside once he becomes a gladiator to kind of talk to, who isn't corrupted by Rome. And so he has the doctor friend to talk to, except the doctor hardly actually appears in the movie. But still, he's there. That's a good piece to put in there that you need. Then they have Macrinus, who's a bad guy who's plotting and scheming, and he's like flamboyantly charismatic, which is what this type of political movie would need in a bad guy. Again, I'm not saying it's done well, but he is there. And the movie knows it needs tragic characters who get corrupted by Rome and get taken down unexpectedly. And so it has the mom and her husband, the general. The rating I would give this movie, for a movie to be 4 or below for me, it has to be missing essential elements. And so since this movie has the elements and it kind of made the right moves, although nothing was ever developed, it can't be a 4. And then for a movie to be less than a 3, it also has to be so bad that it's good, like fun to watch. And this movie definitely isn't fun to watch. So it's not a 3 or a 4. And since nothing really worked well and was never developed, It's not a 6 or above. So I'm putting it as a 5, which I think really fits kind of the feeling I had about the movie and other people had too, where it's just a really mediocre, just kind of whatever movie that you forget about right away. And it's just like it leaves you kind of a dissatisfied feeling after you watch it. I want to briefly talk a little more about the positives before I just trash the movie for the rest of this. I liked that how there's action like every 20 minutes. I didn't literally look at the timer and keep track of it, but I think it felt like 15, 20 minutes they had an action set piece, which is exactly what you want in an epic action film. Too often movies don't deliver. Like if it's an action movie, they don't put enough action. This one did it. That's good. The movie was still boring though, and I'll go into why despite all the action. We'll talk about that later. I liked how the movie is an epic. You just don't see that much anymore. And so I liked epic. I like Rome musical themes. There were maybe two of the themes, the songs that I liked. The music sounded like had a mysterious, ethereal, otherworldly, ancient world kind of feel, and it worked well. I liked how the film had a Shakespearean mold, where they try to have tragic characters in tragic moments, or good characters in tragic situations. I like the character General Acacius. I thought he was probably the best character in the film. And I think he could have been the main character, and maybe he would have been the right character to choose as the main character if he had been developed more. The only negative with that is that it maybe might be too much like part one with Maximus because they're both generals. But I liked him because he was a good man in a terrible position. He was a general, a man of action who's tired of war and tired of action. I think that's interesting. And you don't often see that. And he was willing to sacrifice everything for what he believes in and to help others and for his wife. And I think that's just a good setup. And he was also likable. I mean, the actor that was Pedro Pascal. I thought that was probably my favorite role of his I've seen since like Game of Thrones. I never really liked him after that, but this he did a good job. He was likable. I think he looked good in terms of the costumes and stuff like that. He sounded good. He worked for me, and his acting was better too than Hanno. He just as the actor and the character worked better than Hanno did. I liked this guy more, and I felt for him more when he was fighting and when he died. The other thing I liked is the main decision they made, the big decision to have Maximus's kid be the new main character for Gladiator 2. I actually thought that worked. If you think about it, I guess it's kind of stupid and it doesn't work, but it's one of those things like once you just accept, okay, that's the premise and you just watch the movie, if the movie had been good, it would have been fine. No one would care that they kind of did this weird thing of making Maximus's kid the main character. It did work. The only negative, usually, the reason I don't like that kind of stuff is two reasons. One, in franchises, they tend to, well, if you take Star Wars, every Star Wars movie and TV show now, like every character is like Yoda's grandkid or Luke Skywalker's babysitter or Han Solo's ex-girlfriend or great grandkid. Like every character is connected to this the main iconic characters. I just get sick of that. If you have a big universe like Star Wars universe or Rome, not all the characters need to be interbred, basically. Like just give us new characters and new situations. You don't have to recycle crap. And it's like one of the reasons I hate Star Trek now, even though Star Trek was one of my favorite franchises. Like they did Discovery. And at first I was kind of excited because they were going to do something new supposedly. And then of course the main woman in Star Trek ends up being Spock's sister that he never spoke about. For decades we were with Spock. He never mentioned any sort of sister. And now she's the sister of him just because they don't trust their own writing and their own characters to stand on their own. They have to pull from the past, the stuff people love, to try to get us to like it. It's just a sign of weakness bringing that kind of crap back. And then as Discovery went on, they did more and more of it. It's like, oh, look, there's Captain Pike in number one. And then they brought Strange New Worlds, they brought Kirk and Scotty. Like, I just do not like that. Give us new characters. But in this one, I was kind of okay with it because it's just the second movie. It's not a really long franchise like Star Wars and Star Trek. So I overlooked it and the kid worked fine. The other reason I don't like when they bring characters back like that is too many stories, and it happened traditionally, like in ancient stories, and now it seems to be coming back more and more. Have their main characters end up being princes, princes or princesses, or kings or queens, or if they're normal, then it turns out that they're actually secretly a prince or secretly a princess. Like more regular people could do stuff too. You don't have to be elite, rich. You don't have to have royal blood or be the promised one to solve problems or to be interesting. And I'm tired of that. And we could go back to Star Trek, or excuse me, Star Wars. And of course, Rey, they started out with her being a nobody. And of course, she turns out to be Palpatine's granddaughter, I guess. Like, it was just so stupid. Just let characters be nope. Just have normal characters. It could be a peasant, it could be whatever. And so it's that is actually really bad in this movie. It goes against the theme of the movie because he says he's tired of corruption, he's tired of the emperors, and I'm talking about Hanno here. And at the end, he calls himself the Prince of Rome, like he's some sort of like dictator. He wants people to be like worship him or treat him special because he's the Prince of Rome. I thought that just like annihilated the whole theme, the whole purpose and message of the movie. It was a really bad decision. That being said, if he hadn't called himself the Prince of Rome and made a big deal out of his background, it could have worked. Still, I would have overlooked it, and it would have been fine having the kid of Maximus be the new gladiator. But it still irritates me a little bit. And I'm going to go on to the overview of the negatives I have for this movie. The first thing is there's a cartooniness to the film that betrays their own lack of trust in the story and in the characters. Those elements weren't working, they weren't quite right. So they had to try to mask it by being cartoony in other ways. So you'd overlook the crumbling core, the rotten core of the film. And so what I mean by cartooniness, well, one way that I found it cartoony was the look of the film and the sets. First off, the film, it takes place in Rome, but it looks like it was filmed in the desert, right? Every shot is like orangey because of the tint they put on the film, the filter or whatever. And then there's like dust everywhere. And like the sun's just like beating down and everything looks bleached out. This looks nothing like Italy or Rome. It looks like it was filmed in Israel or North Africa or maybe like some of the deserts in California or something. Another cartoony aspect are the sets themselves. All of the buildings in this film are like crumbling. They're already crumbling. They're like ruins. They almost look like they do today. They just put a roof over on top and they have people like moving around in these crumbled down buildings and everything looks white. It's just like white crumbled marble, which isn't realistic because back then they painted all the surfaces. Like all the statues were painted bright colors. They had frescoes everywhere. And this is really unrealistic and toned down. And I know that they're trying to make it was an aesthetic choice, a thematic choice, because they're trying to show that Rome is corrupt and falling, right? So they made it physically look like that by making it look like a desert, making it look like ruins. But for me, it was just too much. Like it took me out of the film, and I never felt like I was actually in Rome. They also got the architecture wrong. Like the buildings they have there didn't look really Roman. And that's because they actually filmed, I think, in Malta and they used real buildings in this like medieval fortress part of it. So the time period is completely wrong in the buildings they use, and it just took me out of the film. The other way the movie was cartoony was in the action. The characters like obviously missing, like swinging their swords and they like swing like a foot above the guy's head. And the guy that is about to be hit, he like barely ducks, you know. You could tell this is like two actors who trained with the scene or stunt doubles. It's like so cartoony, almost like the 60s and 70s, like the old Western movies. It just felt silly. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't gritty. It just looked fake. On top of that, they had animal fights in this. They had baboons, they had a rhino, they had I think sharks. And for me, all these characters, all these those animal models, the CGI just looks so terrible. They look plasticky and rubbery. It's just really silly. And like the rhino was like 20 feet tall. They just like amped it up. And the baboons are just like these psychopathic, bloodthirsty creatures shrieking, looking like rubber. It was just horrible. Bad cartoony action. The other example of cartooniness, and probably the most serious one, is their depiction of evil in this film. This movie defines evil purely through obvious physical characteristics or behavioral characteristics. Basically, to sum it up in one word, you're evil, according to this movie, if you're gay, basically, because Denzel and the Emperors are like flamboyantly gay. They act gay, they're around gay guys. Denzel makes a few like stupid, crude jokes about tasting Rome, like alluding to, I guess, gay stuff, basically. I mean, it's such a shallow way of defining evil. It reminds me of one of the most egregious examples of this, and that is the movie 300 with Gerard Butler. And the bad guy in that is Xerxes, I think, Darius or Xerxes, I think Xerxes, the king of Persia. And when they show this guy, when he like first pops up, it's so outrageous. He's like this giant, and he's like mostly naked. He's wearing like a diaper or a loincloth, I believe. And he has like leather straps and like pierced nipples and stuff like that. Like it's so over the top gay and like BDSM. It's like, is that the only way to define someone evil? Is that how evil people look? They walk around with nipple piercings. And then in that same movie, the Spartan who betrays the Spartans, the 300, is a hunchback, if I remember correctly. So basically, in that movie, you have two examples of what they're doing in Gladiator, where they define evil according to their physical characteristics and their like behavioral sexual proclivities. And it's so shallow. If you've done a movie where you rely on your characters, your bad guys being evil, and you have to show it with like scars, like James Bond characters always have scars, right? The villains, or they're gay, they have a lisp, this kind of stuff. You've done something wrong on this script because you shouldn't have to use physical markers like that to show a deeply personal, moral, ingrained thing like evil, right? Evil doesn't show physically. So if you're doing that, that means you're cheating and you failed as a writer. It would have been far more interesting if they'd handled evil as not about physical corruption or about lecherousness or anything like that. Because the theme of the movie is when a system has been so corrupted that evil is accepted as normal, it corrupts and destroys even the best of us, right? It hurts us all. That's, I think, the ultimate theme of the movie. And so I think they should have made evil. Well, think about our world in the United States or the present world. The people who do evil in this world, the most powerful people, like politicians, businessmen, whatever, they don't walk around with leather straps and nipple piercings and scars on their faces and all this crap, right? They wear business suits for the most part, or hoodies or t-shirts. They look normal, but they could still be evil. And so I think this would have had more relevance if they'd handled it with a little more sophistication instead of this cartooniness. And it would have served the story. Because right now, relying on these physical characteristics and their sexuality to show them as being evil, it means that there isn't any work being done on the character side or on the plot side of things. And so what do I mean by that? Well, let's break this down. Let's take the two emperors, right? The movie wants you to take for granted that they're evil and that Hanno has to topple them. And eventually Macrinus, but we'll get to Macrinus next. So my question is, what do the emperors do in the movie that you see that is evil? I'm going to set a little context here first. By evil, I'm not including stuff that is normal in society that was done for hundreds of years before these emperors were born and for like a couple hundred years after them. And by that, I mean the fact that they have gladiator fights in the Colosseum doesn't make them evil because, hundreds of senators and consuls before them and dozens of emperors before them did the exact same thing. And so since this movie takes place in this period with these characters, it can't be something that everyone did before them and after them. We have to focus on these particular characters. What's special about these guys? Why are they so evil? And what's so compelling about their story that this movie has to be about them? So just the fact that they have slaves or that they have gladiator fights, that's not evil for the context of the story, all right? So what's the first thing they do that's evil? And so I think when I look at this, which is kind of surprising, is that the two evil emperors never did a single damn thing that was evil in the entire movie. until very late in the movie when Macrinus was in charge. So on their own, they didn't do anything evil. All they did is sit there on their the trinculum or whatever, that couch that the Romans had. If you think that's what it's called, they would sit there surrounded by their courtiers or whatever, courtiers. They would watch gladiator games. They would laugh. They were petulant. They were childish, sure, but that's not evil. And that was it. They just sat around, watched games. They laughed. Maybe they like drank wine. They didn't do anything evil. I guess the closest thing you could say that they did, something they did that was evil, was them like doing the thumbs up or thumbs down on the gladiators, like deciding someone's life or death. And I think it's on the right track, and I would go with that as I fixed it. Like their power to arbitrarily choose life or death for any Roman citizen or non-citizen is evil. But I think the way they showed it in the movie doesn't really work, because then they're doing thumbs up or thumbs down at the end of the fight was accepted practice in Roman society at the time in the Colosseum. And in fact, when he did thumbs up or thumbs down, that wasn't at the start of the fight. That was at the end when the person already lost. That everybody understood the rules. And then the emperors were allowed to either give mercy or to let the fight play out the way it had already been decided on the sand, right? In the arena. So they weren't really arbitrarily thrusting this life or death on people. They were given a chance to give life, but in fact, the person had already lost the fight, and they were pretty much assumed to be dead unless it was stopped. So I don't think them doing thumbs up and thumbs down works as evil for the movie. And so now let's move on to Macrinus. And you think, oh, okay, this guy did evil, right? He was over the top, and he was scheming and stuff. But what was the first thing he did that was evil? And again, him being a gladiator owner doesn't count for the same reasons that I mentioned with the emperors. And also him bankrupting the senator and entrapping him basically doesn't count either. Why? Because Macrinus didn't do anything evil to bankrupt the guy. All Macrinus did is when he went to that party, he asked that guy, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like one sentence literally. He just said, "Are we betting on the game?" And the guy's like, "How much?" And Macrinus says, 1,000 golden denarii. And then the guy immediately says, 2,000. Like he jumps in to gamble. He basically put his head like under the guillotine and then pulled the blade down on his own neck. He jumped willingly into his own ruin. Macrinus didn't do it. He didn't force anything on him. He didn't trick him. He didn't lie to him. He didn't manipulate him. He just asked, "You want to bet?" The guy said, "Sure." They bet. He lost. And then Macrinus comes back and he says, "You want to double or nothing?" Like literally, that's what he says. And the guy's like, "Yes." So twice now, Macrinus just asked like a single question, and the guy jumped at it. So Macrinus didn't scheme with this guy. He didn't use him or abuse him or manipulate him to break him and to take his money, his house, and his political power. The guy jumped into it on his own. So Macrinus wasn't evil there. And so what's Macrinus's first evil thing? What's he do that's truly evil? The first thing Macrinus does that I would consider evil happens at, are you ready? Because this might blow your mind. 1 hour and 45 minutes into the movie. That's the first time Macrinus does anything evil. And really, I guess anybody in the movie does anything truly evil. And that's the point where he knowingly lies to Caracalla that his brother is going to lie about him and have the rioters go on him. So he's basically manipulating the brother into killing the other brother. That is evil. And then right after that, he actually helps the brother stab Geta. So yes, that's evil. But just for context, the average movie, like if you're trying to be a screenwriter and you look up how long you should make your movie, they always say don't go past 120 minutes, which is 120 pages, because one page of script equals 1 minute of movie when they film it. So don't go past 120, and you could even go down to like 90. It's like 90, 100, 110. That's like the sweet spot. So in other words, this movie doesn't, the bad guy doesn't do anything evil until your average viewer watching your average like ideal movie has already finished the movie. They've had a snack. They took a shower. They took a dump. They probably took the dump before the shower. Then they brushed their teeth. Then maybe they had sex. And now they're in bed, like on the verge of falling asleep. And that's when Macronus decides to finally do something evil and get the damn movie going. Like, that's how bad this is. And in fact, strangely, you could say that Macronus was actually a good guy up until this point, for the most part. Why? Because when he took Hanno, he made him a gladiator instead of just like working him as a normal slave or a laborer or something like that. So as a gladiator, and he promised Hanno this, Hanno has a chance to fight for freedom. So he's giving him an opportunity to get out of this. And then Macrinus, once they capture Lucilla and the general, he convinces the emperors not to execute them, to let the general fight in the Colosseum and let the gods decide. So he could have told the emperors to just kill them immediately, cut their heads off. But he said, no, let's give him a chance. And if he wins, he'll live. And then, as I said earlier with the senator, he gave him an opportunity to win his money back. He let him bet twice, doubling down. So really, Macrinus is giving everybody chances. He gives Hanno a chance for freedom. He gives the senator a chance for financial freedom. And he gives the General Cassius a chance for physical freedom, to get out of capture for committing mutiny or rebellion, treachery. So he's not that bad, really, so far, if you look at it clearly. If you get past Denzel and the two emperors' physical portrayal with all the robes, the makeup, the ear piercings, the gay, what's the word, castrated eunuchs around them and all that stuff, they're not bad guys until late in the movie, until the movie should be over already. I'll talk more about this movie and how it handles, or how it should have handled, evil and the theme of social corruption later on. But right now, first, I want to talk about something that I call epic sequel syndrome. And what is epic sequel syndrome? It's when a sequel is so desperate to recapture the success of the original one that they rely on spectacle and lose track of the heart that made the original popular in the first place. And so what they end up doing is, instead of having one bad guy, they have to have 2 or 3 bad guys. And instead of just a few action sequences, they pump it full of action. They have multiple love interests, or new love interests, every movie, every sequel. The budgets are multiples larger than the original one. Instead of having a few locales where they shoot, they have to travel the whole world, go to every exotic place on the planet. The movie I blame for starting this trend, and this is just my idea, it's a little movie called Terminator 2. Terminator 1, of course, was hugely popular, hugely successful, but it's also a fairly small to medium budget movie. Then part 2 came, and the budget was just huge, and that was like the first mainstream movie that had special CGI, basically, with the liquid metal. They had more shooting locations, like they went to the desert, they went to that cool factory at the end. And it was just bigger than Terminator 1 in every way. And so I think people, after the producers, after that movie, would look at that as an example that that's how you make sequels. You have to go bigger and better. You need a bigger budget, a bigger villain, just tons of special effects, just throw money at it to try to make a success. But I think they learned the wrong lesson, because the reason Terminator 2 had all those special effects and had that big budget and had a crazy bad guy wasn't to create spectacle. It was because the story required it. Because the whole concept of Terminator 2 was that super villain from part 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger, comes back and now he's the good guy. So then what could possibly threaten him? And so to create a credible threat against the T-800, you have to make a crazy bad guy, the T1000, the liquid metal guy. So the story demanded it. It wasn't the other way around where they were just, here's money, just use it somehow, put CGI in there. It was part of this script. It was called for. And that whole thing was in service of the theme of the movie, which is family, with Sarah Connor and the Terminator becoming like the mother and father of John Connor. So it worked. And that's how you do a sequel, right? To bring it back to Gladiator, Gladiator 2 is not how you do a sequel, right? This movie tried too hard to be an epic. The sets were huge. They went crazy with all the costumes, like the rubbery looking costumes. They had a ton of animals now. Like the first one, I think they had only one lion or tiger towards the end that came out to fight Maximus. And this, they had the baboons, the rhino, the sharks. They had the naval battle at the start and the naval battle in the Colosseum. They had not one evil emperor, but two. Plus, they had Macrinus. So they just amped up everything. It was like they didn't know what they were doing and just like not even throwing darts. They were like shooting a shotgun, just hoping some of these pellets hit somewhere near the target to make a decent movie. And somehow they mostly all missed. All these damn pellets missed the target. So how do you approach making a sequel? Well, I'll talk about that more at the end when I discuss the kind of the big picture approach that I would have taken in making Gladiator 2. But first, let's talk about the key problem in this movie and the key solution. The main problem in this movie is static characters. And if you have static characters, you also have a static story and static plot. And so what I mean by that is that the characters never changed from the beginning of the movie to the end, or you can even extend that. They don't change from before the movie starts to the end. Likewise, they never take action to do anything because their beliefs, their morals, their desires, their goals never changed, and so they never did anything to accomplish them. I already talked about how the emperors in Macrinus didn't do anything evil, but by extension, that means they didn't really do anything at all. Because that's what they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to do evil. They're supposed to be the opposition, the bad guys. So if they're not doing evil, they're useless characters. They're not acting. They're not doing anything. But you could also say Hanno is doing nothing. Because let's just look at it closely. What does Hanno do the entire movie? Once he's captured as a gladiator, which is at the end of Act 1, he's either fighting in the ring, which he's forced to do, right? He doesn't volunteer or decide who he's going to fight. They just throw him in the ring and he either kills the guy or they kill him. So he's doing what he's forced to do there, which means he has no volition. He's static. Or for so much of the movie, he's sitting in his cell or like in the bath. Literally, he's sitting on a bed or in the bath. And Macrinus comes and talks to him, I think 2 or 3 times, maybe 4. His mom comes to talk to him twice. The doctor comes to talk to him, I think twice. The gladiator trainer comes to like summon him or kind of talk to him, I think twice. And maybe I'm missing somebody else, but as you could see, Hanno is basically sitting on his ass, literally, in his room, and then people just come and talk to him, like, "Hey, what up?" And usually the scenes aren't even that long. They just a few sentences back and forth, and then they leave. So if he's either fighting fights that he's forced to fight, or he's just sitting and waiting for people to come talk to him, and they barely have a conversation, what is he doing? He's doing nothing. He does nothing for the entire movie. Even at the end, when he supposedly rebels, he didn't even rebel. I mean, just look at it closely, that the ending. He gets the keys to the cell so they could all get out. And he tells the guy to bring the army on Rome. So he gets the keys, he could get out and he could take everybody out, right? But then in the next scene, the gladiator trainer comes to get him out of the ring, to get him out of the cell. And Hanno's in his cell still. He's still locked up and everybody else is locked up. Now, of course, it turns out the doors were actually unlocked because they unlocked them. But they chose to go and wait in the cells for no reason. And then as soon as the one gladiator trainer comes in to talk to him, to take him out to the ring, that's when they bust out. And then what do? They go to the ring, just like the guy wanted him to do. They don't go to save his mom because she's still not even out on the ring at this point. She's still like under the Coliseum, just like they are. So they just have to like walk down the hall to save her. But no, they don't do that. They're going to stay in their cell and wait so they could trick the gladiator trainer that they're not shackled and the doors are unlocked. That's like the big reveal. But it's so stupid because while they're doing that, the mom is wheeled out into the Coliseum on the stage. And so now they have to go up there and fight. And Hanno is fighting just like Macrinus and the Emperors wanted him to do in the first place. So if he's doing what everybody wanted in the first place, fighting in the arena against a Praetorian army, then how is that a rebellion? He's just a moron. He's doing what they're telling him to do, just like he did the entire movie. So he still doesn't even take action when he literally has the keys to his jail cell and the keys to like the movie, I guess you could say. He was like, nah, I don't need this. I'm just going to stay in my cell. I'll let my mom be shackled and wheeled out onto the arena. And then I'm going to go fight just like they want me to, like a good slave. What made this funny for me is that before they went out into the Coliseum to fight Hanno and his buddies, the other gladiators, he gave this like supposedly epic speech. And it wasn't epic. It was completely stupid. This movie has some really stupid lines, and maybe I should list them or say them later. It had some good lines too. I didn't mention that. But it has some really dumb lines. This speech is really stupid. But anyways, he says, I am not a general, but we are all soldiers. And up until now, we have fought for nothing but another day's survival. And then one of the guys in the crowd, one of his gladiator buddies, is like, what would you have us do? And Hanno says, well, you could return to your cells if you do not wish to fight this battle. And everyone's like, ha, huh, and they all laugh because it's like such a good joke, you know? But the joke's on them because that's what they just had done. He had the keys, he opened it, and they're like, wait, let's all go back to our cells and wait. So this could be real dramatic for this gladiator trainer guy. He'll be surprised. It's going to be worth it. And it's just like the movie talking to itself about how stupid it is. The other funny thing about his speech is he says, so far, we have only fought to fight another day or to live another day. Well, yeah, that's the problem with the movie. You have a main character who had no long-term goals, who wasn't changing, who wasn't struggling and fighting for something desperately. He was just kind of there fighting fights that were forced on him. The problems I mentioned with the movie earlier about its cartooniness, specifically the kind of cartooniness of the look of the sets, the filters, like it looked like a desert, the cartoony action, the cartoony bad guys and characters, and then that epic sequel syndrome itis that this movie has. All of those things exist because the characters are static. Because the writers, the directors, the producers, they knew some. They had like I think like a subconscious understanding that nothing was actually moving in the script. The characters weren't moving. The story wasn't moving. It was kind of dead on arrival. And so they had to add all these spices, all these seasonings to try to get you to think, oh, this tastes good, but the core of it is just bland. There's nothing there. Now, I know I haven't completely explained what I mean by static characters, and I haven't given as many examples as I should, and I am going to. But first, I want to give the solution because the solution I have for this movie involves a key aspect of any storyline. And I want to use that as like the anchor point, the pivot point to understand the whole movie and how the characters are static. And so what do I mean? Well, the main solution that I have for this movie as the writer, or if I were to work on it, what I would do if I were revising this is to focus on the inciting incidents for each character, the main characters. What are inciting incidents? Well, inciting incidents is the thing that happens to a character that incites him to action. It's a moment, it's a thing that changes his entire life and his viewpoint, and it gives him a new desire. So the inciting incident is what sets him off on his journey. Let's say you had this nerdy character, a high school nerd, going into senior year. Like every nerd, he's really into the popular girls. He thinks they're hot, but they don't talk to him. He's really nervous, shy, can't get any action. He's never kissed a girl or had sex. And at this point, he's basically going to give up on that. He just figures he's never going to get the girl of his dreams. And he's going to go to MIT and study engineering and be an engineering nerd the rest of his life, like his parents want him to do. And so that year, senior year, he studies hard, he gets straight A's, he graduates, and he goes to MIT. And he does exactly what he had expected to do. Now, how's that story? Is it good? Was it thrilling? And the answer, of course, is no. It was. It sucked because nothing changed. Nothing happened, right? There was no tension. The guy never had any hope. He just figured he was going to study and be an engineer. And guess what? He studied and went on to be an engineer. So now let's change it slightly. And at the beginning of that senior year, the best friend of the hottest girl in the school tells him that that hot girl thinks he's really funny. And she really actually likes his personality. And she wishes she could go to prom with him at the end of the year. But she can't because she only dates buff dudes. And if he were buffer, a little more athletic, she'd probably be really attracted to him, go to prom with him, and have sex with him. So did anything change? Is that an inciting incident? And of course it is, because this guy is going to want to be working out every minute of every day for the rest of the year so he can hook up with her. And plus, this would change his life because now he's going to be working out. He's not going to be studying. That puts his studies at risk to get into MIT. His parents would be worried. As he gets buff, he might get popular. He's going to be hanging out with jocks, so he loses his old friends. I mean, it's not a great storyline. It's pretty normal, like the Apatow style of movies and stuff like that. But it's a clear thing that just one small thing, this one little conversation with a friend saying that the hot girl wishes he were a little bit buffer, more athletic, and she thinks he's really cute otherwise. That changed his life. It changed everything. Now he has a goal, right? He has hope. That's an inciting incident. Gladiator 2 is like the first version of that story where it's static. And yes, I know what you're saying. You're saying, but there is an inciting incident, or there are a few, mainly that Hanno's wife dies, right? And yes, that's supposed to be the inciting incident. But when you look at it closely, you'll see that it doesn't incite anything. And you could see that with just a few simple questions. For instance, before the movie starts, what is Hanno's feeling? What are his feelings towards Rome? What's his opinion of Rome? And the answer is he hates Rome. And how do we know this? Well, he's right after when he's being, I think when he's in the boat, and then like he's in this carriage being carried into being a gladiator, like right after he gets captured. He tells the other guys that Rome is like a disgusting city because he's talking from his memory. They don't know that, but he's talking from his memory as a little kid that he hates the city. So he didn't form that opinion after his wife died. He had that already since he was a little kid. Furthermore, the opening of the movie literally starts with him stabbing and chopping Romans. He's literally fighting and killing Romans. So he doesn't like them. Okay, so now let's ask a different question. After his wife dies, what does he think of Rome? And the answer is the exact same thing. It hasn't changed. He still hates Rome. He still wants to take it down. He still wants revenge and all that. And then at the end of the movie, what does he think of Rome? Well, he still hates that version of Rome. Sure, he wishes it were better, but his opinion about Rome is still the same. Nothing really changed. Nothing incited him to have a different viewpoint. And earlier I explained how Hanno doesn't do anything in the movie. Right? He's either fighting fights that he's forced to fight, that he has to fight, or he's sitting on his ass in his room and people just come talk to him and he kind of like mumbles his way through conversations and then they leave. So he's completely inactive. So if he's inactive, that means he literally wasn't incited to do anything. Because if he were incited, he would be acting. So he doesn't have concrete goals, and he didn't have a plan to carry out those goals. So we have two ways of knowing that he's a static character. One, we know from his opinion, from his viewpoint, that it didn't change. And two, we know because of his physical actions, since he's not taking any, that he didn't change, that he's not trying to accomplish anything. So he's a static character, and he's the main character of the movie. And so if you have a main character who doesn't change values and doesn't take action to accomplish a goal, you don't have a story. It's static. And you could go through the other characters as well. Like, let's say the General Acacius. Before the movie starts, what's his key condition? What's his main attribute? And that is he's tired of fighting and he thinks Rome is corrupt. Right? Once he does the battle, that first naval battle, he has the same exact opinion. And later on, when he's staging the rebellion and when he's in the arena fighting, and then when he dies, he has the exact same opinion. Nothing changed. You might say he did change, and that he went from thinking Rome is corrupt and being tired of fighting to actively waging a rebellion. But you can't point to where he changes. Like, what made him want to do the rebellion? That's the first problem with that. Was it the battle? Because he's been involved in a million battles before. So what was so special about this battle and seeing the bodies? I think they burned the bodies or a mass grave or something. Like, how did that turn him? It wasn't an inciting incident because there was nothing new to his life that changed him forever. He's done that. That's his job, literally. And the second point you might say could have been an inciting incident for him is after his triumphal march, he goes up the steps of to the palace, and he's like, he tells the emperors, he's glad to have done his duty, but he's done now. Rome needs to rest. And they say, no, you got to take India and Persia. But it was such a quick moment. It was like a 5-second thing, or maybe even less than that. And then they don't play off that anymore. Nothing else came of it. And they hadn't built up his desire to like retire before that. So it doesn't function as an inciting incident either. And the second problem with him not having, or the second way that this failed, is that when he sees his wife for the first time, he immediately says, we have to rebel. Like, it's his idea. He just jumps into it. It didn't feel like anything really compelled him to do it. Nobody convinced him to do it. Nothing happened to change his mind. He was just already sick of Rome, and then he's like, let's rebel. So he doesn't have that moment of cleavage, that cleaving moment, a fulcrum point of an inciting incident. He stays the same. He's static. Same thing with the wife. We know how she felt before. We know how she feels when she sees her son again. We know how she feels when she's being wheeled out to be killed in the Colosseum, right? She's still the same person, same feelings about Rome, wanting to overthrow it, thinking it's corrupt, and so on. Her inciting incident is supposed to be when she sees her son again. I think that's how I read it. But it didn't function as the real inciting incident because before she saw her son, she was already planning a rebellion. Then after she saw her son, she was still planning a rebellion. So in point of fact, again, no change, static character. With Macrinus and the emperors never really did anything. I guess you could say Caracalla, he kind of had a freak out, and he's like, says he's jealous of Gaeta because he said Gaeta like tried to strangle him in the womb, and that he always wanted attention. But he said that for like literally maybe 20 seconds. That was like a 20-second interchange with Macrinus. So it's not really real. They just kind of threw it in there, and it had no bearing on the story that much, really. And there wasn't really an inciting incident for him. Period. Like what, the rioting outside? How did that incite him to anything? He was never afraid of the people before. It's an artificial incitement. Those are both artificial justifications the writers put in there because they knew that the character was too empty and they needed an excuse for why Caracalla will want to kill his brother, because they didn't set that up. And now they're like, oh shit, we need a reason for him to kill him out of nowhere, because these guys never fought anywhere in the movie. They were like the same character almost throughout. Suddenly they want to assassinate him and they need an excuse. And that's why they threw that stuff in there. Macrinus is a little bit tougher, but I think he does have an inciting incident in this, or at least he has something that's supposed to be the inciting incident, the way that Hanno's wife dying is supposed to be the inciting incident. And so Macrinus, his inciting incident, in theory, is not done well, but in theory, the incident is when he first sees Hanno fighting. And that's when he realizes he can use Hanno as a means to achieve power and take over Rome. That's supposed to be what it is. But let's just look at it from the wide picture again, like I did with the other people. Before the movie starts, Macrinus is rich. He has a ton of gladiators. Apparently, they barely mentioned this like towards the end of the movie, but apparently he's like the biggest arms trader in the whole empire. Like he gives the armies weapons and stuff. So he's filthy rich, apparently. And he just seems to like talk to senators. Like he's powerful, right? He's powerful in every way before the movie starts. When he sees Hanno, he's still powerful. And at the end, right before he dies, he's still powerful. He hated Rome from before the movie started because he was a slave. He hated it at the end because he killed the emperors. So he doesn't change at all either. And none of the characters do. But something can easily be done with this. And that is if you focus on the inciting incidents, you have to make sure that the characters are different before that incident, before that action, and then show how that action changes them to the opposite somehow. And it would take work, but in theory, it's actually pretty simple. I could see how we could do this with each character. So let's begin with Hanno, because he's the main character. And as the main character, the whole story kind of hangs off of him, off of his architecture. And also, I think if we really nailed down Hanno and didn't even work that much on the other characters, or just made them reactive to him, this movie would have been a lot better. It would have gone from like a 5 out of 10, which is what I consider this to be, to like a 6 or maybe 7 out of 10. And once you get to a 7 out of 10, that's a point where I think it would have been a popular movie. Maybe not a blockbuster. It probably wouldn't win Oscars or anything. But it would have been popular and good enough to where it would have been a hit, like when it came out on streaming to like Netflix or something like that. And it would have been considered not as good as Gladiator, but a pretty good movie on its own. And people would like, it would spread word of mouth. Like, yeah, you should check it out. It's worth it. All right. So where do we start with Hanno? Well, we start in building this out from what's supposed to be his inciting incident, which is the death of his wife. And I agree with that. I think that's a good move. Like I said, this movie makes good moves. It just didn't do enough with them. So I think that's fine. We could start there. Keep that, because I don't want to change this movie radically. That's my whole approach. And then where do you go from there? Well, I think the easiest thing to do is, since we kind of know where the movie wants to go, let's nail down Hanno's attitude after she dies, because that's simpler and more obvious. And then once we have that, that kind of tells you how he needs to be before. And plus, since most of the movie takes place after her death, because you have a little bit of Act 1, all of Act 2, all of Act 3 following that point, and you only have early Act 1 in front of it, you want to nail down most of the movie, which is that point afterwards. Get that real concrete, because that's where we're going to spend all our time with this character. And the stuff before that is like introductory as contrast. So get that second half after her death down. So what's his state? What's his attitude, his values? What are his goals after she dies? Well, obviously he wants revenge. That's unchanged in that kind of vague sense, right? He wants revenge. That's how the movie is right now. But I think the movie did it wrong, because what they say he wants is revenge against General Acacius. But I think that's an unworthy goal. That's unworthy of the hero. That's unworthy of the movie. Because the problem Hanno has, as he says in all his speeches throughout the movie, is that the dream that was Rome was corrupted. And so he wants to bring that dream back. And so killing General Acacius doesn't bring the dream back. The problem Hanno has, and that the theme of the movie has, isn't one individual. It's the whole system, so to speak, right? The general's too small a target, in other words, for Hanno and for what his beliefs are. So I would switch it from him wanting to kill General Acacius. And by the way, he doesn't even know General Acacius. He just saw him for a few seconds in the fight, and he saw him give the order to shoot his wife after his wife almost shot him and like killed the general's friend just like a foot away from him. So it wasn't even unjustified, really. He doesn't know the general. He's just like, I guess I'll get that guy. Like it's kind of arbitrary and silly for him to be obsessed with killing him with the way they set it up. So the way I would do it is he should want to kill the emperors, assassinate the emperors. Right away, that's a much larger goal, much grander goal, more exciting, more thrilling, much more difficult than killing some general who hates fighting, who wants to retire and likes to spend his time in the garden of his villa with his wife complaining about his job. Right, like that's not a very tough target or an exciting target to go after. Going after the emperors is much bigger. Plus, as you see the emperors in Rome, you'd have them surrounded at all times with Praetorian guards. Casey has never had guards, right? So he's an easy target. The emperors, you'd be like, whoa, okay, this is going to be exciting. This is crazy. And then once you see how the emperors are actually crazy in the revised version and like evil, you would know these guys don't mess around and that he's stepping into a very dangerous situation with his plan to try to execute them. And now we have to talk about his plan. How is he going to kill the emperors? Well, the plan that would make sense to the character, to the context, and for the movie, since the movie is called Gladiator, would be for him to plan to become a gladiator. He would willingly go into it. Once he sees his wife get killed, he wouldn't be captured yet. I would have him give himself up with the idea of becoming a gladiator, being the best gladiator Rome has ever seen, to become really famous, so that he would get the attention of the emperors and get close to them and be able to kill them. And he could kill them in the Colosseum. He could kill them at a private party like he did in the movie at one point. Or maybe they would give him an audience because they want to meet him and have him go to the palace to meet them personally. Because they like him. They like his fighting and stuff like that. Of course, they don't know he wants to kill them. So that's his plan. He's going to use he's going to use his fighting abilities to get close to them and then execute them. There are two things I'd like to set up at this point to set this movie apart, to set this character apart from Maximus and the movie apart from the first one, Gladiator. The first thing I do is I'd make this character, at this point, he's not fighting for the dream that was Rome. He's not fighting for honor, and he's not noble in how he fights. I want him to be only concerned with vengeance, fueled by fury. So he's not Maximus, right? This guy is just out for blood, out for revenge at all costs. The second thing I would do to make this different, usually in these types of movies, when the guy who hasn't like been in the ring gets thrown in the ring, in the gladiator ring, he doesn't know how to fight and he's like learning the ropes. You know, he barely survives the first fight and then he gets better and better and better and more famous. I wouldn't do that. I would make Hanno an awesome fighter right from the start. And to go with what I said in the first bit about him being fueled by fury, he would be an absolutely just a beast in the ring. He wouldn't follow any rules. He would just tear his opponents to pieces very quickly, immediately. And my model for this would be kind of like Mike Tyson in real life. Like he just goes in, he doesn't talk, he doesn't showboat. He just knocks the guy out, like cuts his head off or slices his throat or like stabs him a bunch of times in the chest and just like leaves. Very quick, brutal fights. He's so good and fights with such fury that he would be shocking even to the Roman audience in the Colosseum watching. Like instead of people screaming and chanting his name and stuff, after he executes like his first guy, they would just be silent as he walks off. Like they can't believe the brutality of what he just did. And I also, of course, would want the audience, us, to be kind of shocked with how this guy is. Because at this point, he's almost like an anti hero. He's out for vengeance. Now, he's not going to be like this the whole movie, because his arc eventually is to remember the dream and to come to a point where he has to learn to get rid of the fury and to fight with kind of nobility. He remembers Maximus. He remembers his grandfather, Marcus Aurelius. He gets to know his mom again, and he meets General Acacius. So over time, over the course of the movie, that fury is mellowed and transformed into something bigger. To make him a great fighter in this movie, I would also try to do something a little unique that I haven't seen in a Gladiator film or a Roman film or ancient world film before. And that is, I would give his background that after he left Rome in exile, he traveled around the world to stay ahead of the opponents. So let's say he stopped in Greece when he was a kid for a while before he moved to the Middle East or wherever he is now. And I'll go over that later, like his origin story. But while he was in Greece, he learned pancration. And pancration was the ancient art of wrestling, of unarmed combat. And so when he's fighting in the gladiator ring, I would have him choose actually not to take weapons. So like they would kit him out in like the gladiator gear. And actually in this movie, I would have realistic gladiator combat. Like they used to have different types of gladiators, different archetypes that had certain weapons and armor, like a net, a trident, and stuff like that. This movie didn't have that. And this is part of the reason I said the combat was stupid, because it was like guys with these little gladii, those little swords, just like swinging, almost like I used to swing when I was a little kid with my cousins and stuff with a plastic baseball bat from, I forget what, I guess softball or whatever, t-ball. You know, you're swinging, like pretending you have a lightsaber, just like whacking each other. Well, that's what this movie's combat was like. They're just whacking around with these little swords. It was really dumb. I'd have more realistic gladiator combat. But Hanno, as soon as would get into the ring, he would just toss his sword aside and go unarmed. And so he would be able to grapple with the guys. He'd get their weapon out of their hand and he'd like choke them. He'd break their arms. He'd rip their eyeballs out, and that kind of thing. This would enforce the idea that this guy's an absolute beast, fueled by fury, a thirst for vengeance. He doesn't even need weapons. He's just a human killing machine. I hope already you can feel that this version of the character is more interesting and more makes you want to watch him more than what we got in the actual movie. Because now he has a clear goal, he has a clear attitude, and he's interesting to watch. He does something new, right? You want to see him get in these fights. You want to see how he's going to get to the emperors and kill them. He's single-minded, and so you really can't tear your eyes away from this guy. Now we have a little bit of what Hanno becomes after he sees his wife get killed. Because remember, I said we were going to start from the inciting incident and go forward from that to see what he became. We can go back and look at before, what he used to be. And you could do it kind of logically, and it's pretty simple. All you have to do is do the opposite, or as close to the opposite as you can with it still making sense. So after his wife's death, Hanno is fighting with just fury, right? He's bloodthirsty. He wants revenge. Well, the Hanno before is not going to be bloodthirsty. He's going to want to avoid fighting, avoid combat. If after her death, he's delving straight into the heart of Rome to strike them, I would have him avoid Rome before. So how does this actually look in practice? Well, to set this all up, I would actually change his origin a little bit. In the movie as it currently is, he's from Numibia. And from what I could see, it doesn't look that much different than Rome itself. There's like these giant walls in that opening battle. It's a big city, big armies, standing armies. And I would change that to make it so that Hanno, the civilization he's part of, the culture, as an adopted son of it, would be nomadic. All right. So they wouldn't have a city with walls and stuff like that. There would be a nomad culture relying on horses to move around. And you might think, well, why are you going to do that? It's so arbitrary. And it's not arbitrary. I mean, I think it would be cool to show horse, like cavalry battles against Rome. Because actually, in the past, I think 200 years before this movie takes place or something like that, the Romans fought the Parthians in the Middle East. They got their asses handed to them because the cavalry armies had a technique where they would like go in a, it was called a Parthian ring or circle. Like they would, in front of the army, they would go in a circle and shoot arrows continuously at the army. And as the Romans would move forward, the horses would go back. So they would never catch up to them, and they were taking constant shots. So maybe you could throw that in and it'd be cool to see. But I'm not doing that because that's just going for spectacle. I'm not choosing it for that reason. The reason I'm choosing for him to belong to a nomadic culture is because I want Hanno, before the battle that kills his wife and before the movie starts, I want his attitude to always have been to avoid Rome. So as the borders of Rome move out into the world, he leads his people because he's kind of like a leader of, let's say, a tribe, not all the people, but of a small tribe, maybe like 1,000 people or something. He would move him back away from Rome to avoid fighting. So he's always moving back, moving back, moving back. And then finally, at the beginning of the movie, the other tribesmen in his culture come to him and say that they're going to fight one last battle against Rome because they can't run forever. They're going to try to stand up to them. And his own wife says, yes, we need to do that. I'm sick of running. We can't run forever. We need to start a family. We need to settle down and put down roots. And he'd say, no, I know the Romans. I know how they are. We can't engage with them. We can't win. So he would convince his wife and her tribe, her family, whatever, this group of people, to not join that big confederation against Rome. So they would retreat. He would retreat. And maybe he would watch from the mountains as they're leaving and see the rest of his countrymen, his adopted countrymen, taking on the Roman army in this big grand fight with horses and the legion and stuff like that. Maybe in the desert, whatever. And as he watches at first, it would seem like maybe they're going to win. His people are going to beat the Romans. But then something happens. Maybe General Cassius is so good and clever. He's a good leader, kind of like Alexander the Great, or you could choose any inspiration for him. But he's a good leader. He surprises them and he kills this cavalry army that Hanno belongs to, his people. They just slaughter them. And Hanno, of course, and his people are safe. They're in the mountains and they're devastated. But he's saying, well, at least we lived. If we had been there, we would have died. We had no choice. I made the right call. I'm not a coward. We're going to live on to another day. And so he retreats back into the mountains or into the desert. But then, of course, one day, Rome does arrive. They catch him by surprise. And he's forced to fight them in a bad situation. And that's where he finally loses and his wife dies in battle. So after that point, not only is he angry at Rome for what they've done to him and to his people and to his new life and to the future he thought he had, but he's actually furious with himself because he refused to fight for all those years. He was always retreating. He never faced reality. And he thinks he probably got his wife killed, and she was right that they should have stood up earlier. Hanno is now a much more tragic hero than he is in the movie as it currently is. Because in this version, he had a role to play in his own misery, his own downfall, and his own inciting incident. It's not just a matter of bad luck. Because the movie right now, it's basically bad luck. Rome just comes to attack. He fights, they fight, and some random arrow pretty much kills his wife. And then right after she's shot, like seconds after he sees her get shot, he gets hit in the back of the head. I guess he's knocked out and he falls off the wall into the water, unconscious. That could happen to anybody. It's almost an act of, the gods. But once you change it in the way I'm indicating, I think, now he's partly to blame for it, what happened to him. And so now he has a reason to change. The other benefit is now he's active. In the original, once he sees his wife get shot, he gets knocked out, falls into the water. As soon as he wakes up, the Roman soldiers see him and grab him and pull him and capture him to be a gladiator. So he doesn't make a decision at that point. His fate's decided for him, and they just throw him in a small provincial coliseum with baboons to fight. So he's just doing what's thrown at him. But now he's making a decision and he's active. He's an active character. Really quickly, I just want to stress that characters don't always need to hate themselves by any means, although they probably should be uncomfortable with themselves or their lives to get their journey started. But I think that's a very powerful motivator in a dark, epic action movie like this. It's like that kind of motivation, the self hatred, and also wanting revenge for his wife. He wants to kill the emperors, but he also wants to kill himself via this suicide mission. So he's a man with nothing to lose. And so it's a very propulsive force shooting this movie straight out right at the end of the first act, maybe 20 minutes into the movie. I want to go into just a little bit more detail about how he would give himself up to become a gladiator and how his plan forms. Because you want to get this character really nailed down at the start, because that's what anchors you to get the audience on your side for this whole 2-hour movie. So you need a really strong start, a really strong character. What I would do is once he sees his wife die, he wants to rush forward and like grab her. Like maybe he does grab her, he's cradling her, but the Romans are coming forward because she got shot with an arrow or a spear or something. So they're not like right next to her. They didn't hit her with a sword. So they're coming forward and he's holding her. And then I would have his friend come and pull him away to save him. But Hanno doesn't want to leave. So he like grabs him around the shoulders or around the neck or something and yanks him back away from the fight to save Hanno's life. They pull him out of the fight and they actually get away. Just like a few scraps of survivors. Very few. Like if they had 1,000 or 100 or whatever it is from her tribe, her family, whatever group he had and led away, maybe just a few dozen survive. And they're all beat up, bloodied, and so on. They're in a camp that night. And of course, Hanno is distraught at having seen his wife die and everything that's happened. Just the whole world, it's an apocalyptic collapse for him and his people. And then I would have him in his tent. Everybody else is like sleeping or trying to sleep. They're moaning because they're injured and stuff like that. But he's just sitting there with like 1,000-yard stare, kind of like with PTSD or semi-catatonic. But he's like staring at an object that belonged to her. And in the movie, as they had it, the object that they had him have to remind himself of her was that the back of the broken off arrow that had shot her. And I thought that was a weird choice. Like that didn't belong to her. A Roman soldier shot her with that. It was a Roman arrow. And then he broke that off. And I guess he carried like this 5-inch chunk of arrow. I don't know where he stuck it this whole time, but he always had it on him. And for me, that didn't really work as an object to remember her by and to fuel him, sort of. I get what they're saying. Like, it's something that killed her. So it's a focus of like vengeance and fury, supposedly, for him. It didn't really work for me. I don't know. Maybe you could keep it like that. But maybe it could be something she actually gave him or that belonged to her to be more personal connection. And so I'm not sure exactly what it would be. But maybe it could be like her scarf. Like, let's say at the beginning of the movie when times were still good, before the fight, obviously, maybe she like snuck up behind him when he's doing something, taking care of his horse or something. And she like draped her scarf over his eyes and then they do the nasty. So he still has that scarf and he like remembers that. Or maybe, let's say when they act in that scene that she actually dies, the Romans that come and kill her, it's not like an army. It's just like a squad of soldiers that are like checking the mountains and the locals. Kind of like the United States, like we did in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we would just send like squads out to patrol and scout. So maybe it's like an advanced scouting party that come into the village, their camp, everyone gets tense, and he gets up to go talk to them because he's going to try to be peaceful and talk his way out. And plus he knows them because he's Roman. And so when he goes to talk to them, she slips him maybe a dagger so he could just like kill the captain and they'll fight. But he like says, no, I don't want it. And he like pushes her hand away. He doesn't take her dagger and he goes and talks to the guy and then things go wrong. And that's how the fight breaks out and she dies. So now maybe he has that dagger that she was going to give him and he refused. And so that would be a symbol of her. It would be a symbol of his, I guess you could say cowardice or his failure to act and protect her. And it would also be a symbol of his vengeance because he's going to use that dagger to put it in the throats of the emperors. So something like that. But anyways, that night he's looking at this object, whatever it is, and then he would just get up and go to his horse. And as he's getting ready to ride off, his friend would wake up. The guy who dragged him away in the first place and saved his life. His friend would see him leave and he's saying, "What are you doing?" And the guy would ignore him and run and ride off. And so the guy would get on a horse and chase after him to try to save him, to see what's going on. But right when he gets to him and he's about to save him or like pull him back and talk sense into him, it's too late. Some Romans have seen him. They both get captured. And then in the next scene or the scene after that, I would have them in the cage, like in a cart being carted into slavery, or maybe on the slave boat being taken back to Italy. And that's when the friend would ask, what the hell were you doing? Why did you do this? Why did you give yourself up? And that's when Hanno reveals his plan, that he's going to be the greatest gladiator. He's going to use his skills to be the greatest gladiator Rome has ever seen, to be so popular that he'll be able to get close to the emperors and he's going to kill them for what they've done to his wife, to himself, to all his people. And the friend would be like, okay, I've got your back. We're going to do this. So now we've got a really solid start for Hanno, from before the movie starts to where the movie starts to where his wife dies to where he decides on his plan and sets off on his plan. And then from there, I think for the most part, his path is fairly predictable in terms of the gladiator fights he's going to do, the tension of him first seeing the emperors and trying to get closer to them. Maybe talking to Macrinus, like, let me fight in the arena at that competition they're going to have at their villa, because he wants to go so he could be close to them, and so on. So you could kind of see where this is going. But things change about, I would say, maybe 50% to 80% of the way through the film. Because as I said earlier, that fury, that quest for vengeance, he has to change from that. Because the whole theme of the movie is that when evil is accepted at the highest levels of society, like nothing, to the point that it's almost expected or normal, then that means society is so corrupt that evil infects us all, right? We all suffer. And so you see that in the movie as it currently exists. They didn't do a good job with it. But you can see because everyone is touched by evil in the film. Like Hanno's wife is killed, Acacius is killed, the mom is killed, and the dream of his father is shattered. Macrinus has been poisoned by being a slave in the past. Like they've all been affected by this evil that has infected Roman society. So our hero in this is actually infected himself at the start, right? He's almost being turned bad because Rome is so bad. It's so rotten. But then for the movie to have a true meaning, to a true message of hope, this dream that was Rome, he has to turn away from that and realize, no, that's not the path. That's what Rome, the spirit of Rome, this bad Rome wants me to do. We have to fight for a good Rome, a different Rome, the dream that was Rome. And so that you might think, well, he needs another inciting incident to change again. But that's not actually the case, because you only need an inciting incident at the start. Because at the start of the movie, you only have a little bit of time, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes max, to start the movie. So you need like one potent incident, really strong, to get that spark going, and the movie just shoots out. But if you want your character to change again, to have like a realization, it doesn't need to be in one moment, and it probably shouldn't be in one moment. It should be a series of moments in the middle of the movie, that change the character, that they see the truth. They slowly get bent a different way. And so in this movie, I would have him start to see the error of his self-consuming fury, his thirst for blood and destruction, as he interacts with his mother, with Acacius, and with other good people like the doctor. You could keep the doctor in this. Maybe even the gladiator trainer, which they didn't really use. Maybe he's at heart a good guy. He's a fair man. And so as he interacts with people who are good, who have good elements in them, even though they're in this cesspool of Rome, he starts to change. His character changes and develops. And he opens his eyes wider to the bigger picture. And he remembers, or is introduced to, the memory of Maximus and Marcus Aurelius, who live on through his mom and the general mainly. To start him along the path of change, I would have him be introduced to his mom and Acacius probably a little earlier, or even if not earlier, he would definitely get introduced to their plan earlier. Because in the movie right now, his mom never really involved him in the rebellion, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think she never really directly involved him in it. He didn't know much of it. He didn't have a part in it. And I would have her come to him and ask him to be part of it, to get him involved. But at this point in the movie, he only wants blood. So he's not amenable to their plan, because their plan with Acacius and the mom wouldn't be to just bring an army and sack Rome and kill people, because that's what they're going against, right? So it doesn't make sense for them to do that. They're not bloodthirsty. They shouldn't be authoritarian. And Acacius is tired of fighting, so why is he going to fight again with an army? It kind of goes against itself. I guess you could see a path for Acacius leading a fight against his own city, his own people, fighting one last time against his own people. That would be tragic. I guess it could work. But I think the easier path is just to have him not do that. And instead, they want to change society through diplomacy, through a silent coup, basically. So they're getting people involved on their side. They're getting senators and the powerful people in society to join them, to try to build up enough support so they could just overthrow them without necessarily like an army and stuff like that. And so Hanno says, no, that's a stupid plan. It's never going to work. It's going to take forever. You're just holding off. Instead, I'm going to continue with my plan of killing them. And the mom and the case is like begging him, don't do it. Don't do it. It's going to go wrong and it's going to destroy everybody. We have to do it our way. This is the right way to bring back the dream of Rome, through peace, through convincing people to stand up and fight, not with swords and ballista and stuff like that, but with their voice, their vote, right? To be a republic again. And he's basically like, fuck that. He doesn't listen to it, but he would spring his plan into action to kill the emperors anyways, ahead of when Acacius and the mom are ready to do their own thing. And it would go wrong or somewhat wrong, or maybe it's discovered. And so then, because of his actions, there's a huge crackdown and they would have mass executions. And Hannah would realize, once he sees all the people rounded up in the conspiracy that his mom and Acacius were setting, and also people who just didn't like the empire, that there were actually a lot of people who disliked what Rome had become. There were a lot of good people in Rome, and he doomed them all with his plan. As they're all being killed. So a bunch of senators are being killed. And then he has to, of course, fight Acacius in the arena. I did like that. I thought that was good, having them forced to fight. Acacius would talk to him and tell him, look around you. Look at all these senators that got captured. The most powerful, the richest, the most illustrious people of Rome. So many of them were on our side. They don't like what Rome has become either, but they just needed leadership. Don't give up on Rome. Don't give up on the people. And then maybe Acacius, right before he dies, he would give Maximus the ring. Excuse me, not Maximus. He would give Hanno Maximus's ring. Because Acacius he worked under Maximus when Maximus was a general. So maybe he would have the ring, or maybe Lucilla would give him the ring right before he goes out so that he could give it to Hanno to pass it on. You'd say, here's the ring of your father. Think about him. You know what he would want you to do. And it wouldn't be this campaign of vengeance and fury. This is not the path. And then I would have Acacius probably just commit suicide. And then Hanno would be left with the ring. That's when he kind of gets awakened to the possibilities, that there's another path forward, that there's hope. And also that's when he would be introduced or reintroduced to Maximus, his father. And he would maybe he would ask Lucilla about it, or the gladiator trainer, or the doctor. And that storyline would start up. And so he would be changing now. I would have Macrinus use this opportunity with this crackdown to turn the emperors against each other like they did in the movie, kind of. And then once both emperors are dead and Macrinus is the leader, that's when it really gets nailed home for Hanno that he was wrong all along. The problem wasn't the two emperors. The problem isn't individuals, because those guys are gone now, and Macronus stepped in to take their place, and he's doing the exact same thing. So his plan's a little bigger now. And so he realizes he has to take out Macronus, and he has to hand power over to the people. It can't be an empire. How would Hanno's story end? Well, I think obviously he has to kill Macronus. But the question is, does he die killing Macronus, or does he survive? And what happens from there? Because if he dies, then you're kind of repeating Gladiator 1, where Russell Crowe gets killed in the stadium, in the arena with Commodus. You could still do it, but it does. I don't like copying things directly like that. And you try to take a different angle. This movie did take another angle where he survived, and he tells everyone, join me as we fight, as we build a new Rome. But it wasn't satisfying. I'm not sure exactly why. I think maybe because nothing had been set up as to what the new Rome could look like, because they didn't set up those values. And I didn't like the idea of him just becoming a dictator. He calls himself the Prince of Rome. I thought that was ridiculous. It goes against the whole point of the movie. So maybe what it could happen is he would kill Macronus and survive, and the surviving senators and the people hail him as the new emperor. And so he would calm everyone down after a moment. The auditorium would be real quiet. Or maybe if they don't fight in the Colosseum, like he's in the plaza or something, he tells everyone to be quiet. And he tells them his first act as emperor is to open up a session of the Senate, which theoretically, let's say in this movie world, hasn't been done in like 2 centuries. And he doesn't have them decide the future, to hold elections and decide the future of Rome. His second act as emperor is to abdicate immediately. And so everyone's, of course, shocked. They're kind of quiet for a moment. And then they're like excited, they're celebrating. And I would have him just put on like a robe or a hood. He puts the hood up, and he would walk out of the city of Rome anonymously, past everybody who's celebrating him and celebrating what's happened. They don't even know it's him. And he just walk out the gates of Rome and leave in self-imposed exile, because he's turning his back on his royal heritage and on Rome in general. Like his story is done. He messed up with his wife. He messed up with Acacius and his mom. He turned into somebody he didn't like for so long in this film that now he just has to like leave. And he would just go into the wilderness, I think, almost. I don't know. That's my instinct. I would have to think about that if I were actually writing it. But that's kind of what I feel it should go like. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm going to move on now to Macronus. And then I'll follow that with how to handle this movie in general, like how to handle sequels. I'm not going to cover all the other characters because this is getting long already. And plus, I should be getting paid like $1 million to do this stuff, to fix Hollywood. So you guys can use what you've learned from the master's words here to come up with your own ideas on how to fix Lucilla and Acacius mainly. But anyways, Macronus. He's a really important character. I mean, he's the second most important character next to Hanno. I guess you could argue Rome itself is a character, but obviously you need a person. It needs to be personified in something. And so Macronus is the personification of modern Rome. And by modern, I mean in Hanno's time that he dislikes. So we need to get him down. As I said earlier, Macronus's inciting incident. And remember, we're focusing on inciting incidents, right, in this. That's the key. His inciting incident was seeing Hanno fight and realizing this guy's just a crazy beast. He's basically unstoppable. And Macronus can gain a lot of power by using him. Now, how will we gain power with a gladiator? Well, he can make money through bets. But more than that, as his gladiator wins and wins and wins bigger and bigger fights against more and more gladiators, he could start to get invited to parties with the elite, to these special events, these exhibition fights where he's going to put Hanno out there to fight. So we already did what I said earlier about Hannah, where you start with the inciting incident and you move forward. And the forward I have is Macronus sees that he could get bigger. He could get more popular, more powerful, and more ingrained in elite society, with the idea of entwining himself and strangling it, almost like a python, sneakily, and decapitating it to take power himself. That's his goal. Is to achieve ultimate power. All right, so that was pretty easy. We already have his whole movement forward from the inciting incident. So then what does that mean about the past before it? And remember, you want opposites because they have to move from something to something else because that's movement. It can't be from something to the same thing because that's static. So we need opposition. So this means, and it's like math, kind of like it's an equation almost, in narrative when you break it down to the essentials. This means that at the beginning of the movie, or let's say even before the movie starts, well, just like with Hanno, we'll think of it like that. His initial position is if he's powerful later and growing in popularity, that means at the beginning he's not powerful. And if he has the ultimate gladiator after the inciting incident, then that means before he has crappy gladiators. And if he's making money after, that means before he didn't really have money. So now already this character is so much different than it was in the movie. Because in the movie, he's already a badass. He's like one of the richest guys in the freaking world, essentially. If he's the greatest arms dealer in Rome to the army, I mean, it's so rich, so powerful already. Why does he need any more? Now I'm changing it. And I'd make Macronus at the start a small timer. He's a wannabe. He's like a little thug, a little gangster. He wants to be big. He has big dreams. He likes to pretend he's flashy, he puts on a front. But he hasn't really made it in life, and he's not where he wants to be, and he's bitter, he's angry, he hates Rome. It enslaved him. Yes, it gave him freedom, but up to this point, he's like emasculated. He doesn't have the power. He's never gotten past that old stance of being a slave psychologically. All these other senators, the emperors, they're way bigger than him. They do whatever they want. He can't even get close. And I would have it so that at the start of the movie, people don't even talk to him. The elite don't talk to him. He's a nobody. He's a former slave. So how does Macronus look at the start in concrete terms? Well, I would have him relegated to the smallest, most backwater arenas in the Roman Empire. And that's kind of where they show him, but it doesn't make sense because he's rich. Why isn't this like side stadium instead of already being at the Colosseum? But anyways, he's on the outskirts in the worst, league of gladiator fighting, the lowest league. And he doesn't have a huge fortress filled with like 100 gladiators or 1,000 gladiators, which he had in the movie. He would have maybe 2 gladiators, and that's it. That's all he could afford. And so one gladiator might be like a barbarian kid. Kid who's like 19 or something, 16. And he could barely speak Latin, or in real terms, he speaks broken English. And maybe I would make him huge and like really buff. This kid, he's like 6'4" and just like jacked. He's like Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of when he was a kid, like young Arnold, kind of goofy face, but just like this huge body. But he's afraid of fighting, and he can't fight, and he's clumsy, and he's just not a good gladiator. He looks amazing. Everyone thinks he's going to be good, but he's not good. All right, so that's one gladiator he has. He's kind of hopeless. And then maybe another gladiator he would have would be like a 70-year-old man who's like missing teeth. He's falling apart. Half the time he's like asleep or whatever, or complaining about his aches and pains like constantly, or complaining that he wishes he could have sex one last time because he can't get hard anymore. And I might give him the kind of saving grace of being, while he's like weak, he's old and tired. The good thing about him and the crazy thing about him is he's absolutely fearless, to contrast nicely with the other kid. So if like an opposing gladiator, like while they're underneath the stadium getting ready to fight, and another gladiator like comes up to his face and says like, I'm going to kill you. This old guy would have no problem just like headbutting him or grabbing his nuts and just crushing him. Like he doesn't give a shit. He just throws himself out there. And these two characters, the two gladiators, although seemingly hapless and showing that Macronus doesn't have anything really yet, these two gladiators would become friends of Hanno, and they would be a method by which he comes to get over himself. Because this quest of vengeance really is just selfishness. It's a form of selfishness. And so with these guys, as he fights at their side, he would come to like them, and he would realize, he can't just fight for himself and do whatever he wants, because he might leave them exposed or he might put them in danger. So along with Acacius and Lucilla turning him, changing his character, these two also do. So you have a lot of different like points of entry for Hanno to become a new, better version of himself as the movie goes on. All this is to show, getting back to Macronus, that Macronus doesn't have a good stable at the beginning. He's kind of hapless in a bad situation. And this explains why, when he first sees Hanno, he's desperate to get this guy, his golden ticket. Now I'm going to fill in Macronus's opening a little more. But just for context, so far in the movie, we opened with Hanno up to the point where he gave himself up to the Romans, essentially. Then we switched to Acacius to show that he's tired of war and fighting and disgruntled with his life and with Rome. Then we switched back to Hanno in the slave ship or in the slave cart, explaining to the friend why he's doing what he's doing and showing the audience his plan and the friend of his plan. And then we switched to Macronus, which is where we are now. I would start with Macronus going to a small venue, his local venue. And by venue, I mean the stadium. So small, micro coliseum, whatever, a fighting pit. But he doesn't show up in a fancy cart like he does in this movie, where he gets carted everywhere, or not a cart, but a carriage. He doesn't have a carriage. Instead, I would have him walking to the venue, maybe. And he's wearing like a plain robe with the hood up so people can't see him. And he sees all the fancy people riding past him in their carts into town to the Colosseum. And so we can see from his face that he's embarrassed. He feels like shit walking in the heat when there's all these people better and higher than him just walking past. So he's jealous of them, but he also kind of hates them. Then I would have him once he gets into town, he would like go behind an alley, take off the hood, and then he would have his fancy clothes underneath there. So we know that he cares about appearances and that he's embarrassed. Or maybe not that way. Maybe instead of walking, he could, catch a ride in like a donkey cart or something like that. But he's still hiding his face. But either way, you get a lot from him, showing him doing this. Then I would have him go into the stadium. And when he goes in, I would have some man corner him, really angry with him, just berating him, asking him, when are you going to pay me back? You owe me money. And this guy's shaking him down for the money. And Macronus is trying to verbally trying to diffuse the situation, make up excuses, kind of slime his way out of this. But the guy is in his face, not letting him go, telling him he needs to pay him. And then I'll have Macronus like pull a dagger from his cloak, and he's actually going to stab the guy and kill the guy. We can see it in his face. But then the guy's like bodyguard or servant comes into that room or into that alley and like tells me, the fight's going to start. We have to go. And so the guy leaves. And so Macronus puts the dagger away. But the guy, nobody else saw the dagger. It's just Macronus kind of flat. He took it out. So we see it. Nobody else sees it. And so from a scene like that, you get that he's indebted, that he's broke, that he's kind of a slimy figure, a smooth talker, or he thinks he is. But we also see that he's vicious and he's very dangerous and he's crazy. Like he would have slit that guy's throat right there. But the only reason he hasn't done it is because he's too weak to get away with it. So we get a sense that once this guy gets rich and powerful, he's going to be a full psychopath. He's going to be a scary dude eventually. And then as Macronus walks away from that scene to go to his seating, maybe a guy would recognize him in the crowd, another guy wearing a fancy robe. And he would call out to Macronus and ask him when he's going to pay. And this is a different guy. And Macronus hears him. He looks at him. But with like the crowd thronging into the stadium, and with the noise, Macrinus pretends not to really hear. He used to like what, but he let himself be carried away with the throng, so he like slips out of that situation. So now we have two guys that are asking him for money back for him to pay his debts. So it's kind of funny that we see that Macrinus is really poor, but it's also he's kind of pathetic at this point. You know, he's at the lowest of this society. Then Macrinus would go to the bowels of this fighting pit or stadium or the backstage area where the gladiators are, and he meets his gladiators, and this is the first time we see his gladiators too. That they're there in the gladiator stables, getting ready to fight. He would plead with the kid. You know, you got to swing. Don't drop the weapon. Don't run. Just swing. You got to fight, man. You can do this. And so at first he's almost like pleading with them, asking them to do it. But as they're not really taking it on, they're kind of ignoring him, not taking him seriously. Something in him would snap, and he would tell him, "Listen, since I bought you to, you haven't won shit for me, and this time it's going to be different. You're going to get out there, and you're going to fight, and you're going to win. Today's fight, nobody's going to die. This isn't an execution fight. It's not to the death. It's to maybe first blood. So if you don't get out there and get first blood, or at least try, I'm going to fucking kill you myself." You know, and the old man, he's talking to the younger kid. Maybe the old man starts laughing, and he looks at him. He's like, "You too, you've been worthless. Don't laugh, because I'll kill you as well." And so at first he went from pleading and kind of pathetic, like he's been up to so far for the most part, except for that dagger scene. And then something switches, and we see a harder edge to him, where he could be threatening and scary. And because it's Denzel Washington doing the acting, it would be effective. I mean, he'd be good at this. Then he might try to sit in the box, which is where he sits in the movie in its current form. But as he's going to sit in the box, one of the guards would like get in front of him and not let him sit there. And he would say, "Well, my fighters are going to fight here. I have two fighters." And they would say, "No, you're not allowed. You're not at that level," or whatever. So he would be forced to sit with the common people, to his embarrassment. As the fighting is about to kick off, Macrinus would be, we could see he's very nervous. He's like shaking his leg or whatever as he's waiting nervously, because he has a lot riding. He's like the man at the end, you know, owing all this money, and people are threatening him, and everybody looks down on him. So he needs to win this. He needs to start winning. His life needs to change. And so they do the fanfare with like the horns. The fight's about to start. The crier, the guy in the box who calls out to the audience, he would welcome everybody, and he would introduce the fighters and the person who owns them, the gladiator owner. And so he would go through like a list of a few of the guys and gladiators, including the owners who asked Macrinus for money. They're like the richest guys in town, and they would as each person is introduced with their gladiators, they would like stand up in the box and wave to the audience, and everyone would clap and cheer. And then the last person he introduces would be Macrinus. And he says Macrinus' name, and Macrinus goes up to stand and wave, but then they just push on with the fight. Like, "Let's begin." And so Macrinus isn't even able to stand up all the way. So it's like a slight against him. And so now the gladiators are fighting, and it's a bunch of different gladiators on the arena at the same time fighting. Macrinus, of course, is focused on his fighters, hoping they win, but they're complete garbage. They don't know what they're doing. They're getting hit. They're like barely dodging. You know, their sword gets knocked out of their hand, whatever. So we know it's going bad for him, but he hasn't lost yet. But it looks like he's going to lose. And then he notices, like out of the corner of his eye, at a different part of the stadium, there's Hanno, he's not an official gladiator. No one owns him yet, but he could be bought. And he sees Hanno fighting, and he's like just vicious, as I said earlier. He very quickly beats up this huge gladiator that looked like he would lose against. And without even waiting for like a thumbs up, thumbs down, or to celebrate his win, once he knocks the guy on the ground, he'll just like jump on him and like pull his eyes out, or grab the guy's dagger and just like stick it in his throat and kill him. And so since this wasn't a fight to the death, and by the way, I'll have that the town crier, not the town crier, the stadium announcer announce to everybody the rules of the game, that this isn't to the death, it's to first blood. So we all know he's not supposed to kill him. But once he kills him, and once the body drops and like it would hit with a heavy thud, like the stadium would grow quiet, the audience would grow quiet, and the gladiators would stop fighting, and they just like look over, and everyone's like, "What the fuck? Did this guy just kill him? Like this wasn't what was supposed to happen." And the owner of the gladiator that got killed would, of course, freak out because his investment just got destroyed by this punk, and he would call for Hanno to be executed for what he just did. But Macrinus would like jump up, seeing an opportunity, and say, "No, I'll take him, and I'll pay you the money that you spent on your gladiator. So I'll reimburse you." And they tell him, you don't have the money. And he says, "Yes, I have the money. I'll get the money tomorrow." And we know obviously he doesn't have the money, but he's betting down on Hanno because he sees this opportunity. And so that's how he gets Hanno. The next scene would be Macrinus going back down under the arena to meet Hanno for the first time, to talk to him. And he would like take him in, just looking at him. And he'd say, like, "Man, that was what you did out there. It was amazing, but it was insane. You almost got yourself killed." And Hanno would say, "I know Rome and I know Romans, and I know they want to see violence. I knew somebody here would buy me because I'm going to be the best gladiator the world has ever seen. And I wanted somebody who has my ambition to buy me." And Macrinus is like, "Shit, we're the same." At this point, they're kind of on the same side and they appreciate each other. It's like, okay. And Macrinus asks him, "Can you do it again?" And Hanno says, "Yeah." And Macrinus asks him, "Can you do it against multiple gladiators?" And Hanno says, "Yes." So the next scene, I would have Macrinus show up to a private fight. This would be like at night at some villa, a rich man's villa, maybe like in his in the atrium in the center of the house or the backyard, or maybe it's in the street, a street fight like in the alley or something. And it's basically an underground fight or unsanctioned fight, as we would call it today. Just rich people having fun and betting, making money. So Macrinus shows up, he walks in, and all the other guys, all the other rich people and gladiators are already there, and they see him walk in, and they're like, "No, no, you man, this isn't for you. You're small time. Get your face out of here." And Macrinus would say, "Well, things are different now. I have a new fighter." And he would like bring Hanno in, and everyone's quiet, and they recognize this guy. They know who he is, Hanno, because of the fight that day. They're impressed, but also a little scared, but they see an opportunity. And so Macrinus would say, "Well, let's bet 1,000 on him against any of your fighters." And one of the guys would say, "You're crazy. I saw that guy fight today. He's dirty. He doesn't fight by the rules, and something's wrong with his head. I'm not putting up my best gladiator against a guy like that. He's too unpredictable." And so Macrinus would say, "I'll let you put up two of your fighters, two of your best fighters against just this guy for 1,000. And then the guy says, "But if you lose, how are you going to pay me? I know you don't have anything. You could trick people and smooth talk everybody else, but I know you're broke." And so Macrinus would say, "Well, you could take my two fighters, and the other two gladiators." And the guy would laugh, of course, because those are crappy gladiators. And the guy would say, "No, no, no. If you lose, you're my slave. You give yourself up." And of course, this would take Macrinus aback. But after a moment, because we see how desperate it is, and maybe we should play up the desperation earlier to make this pay off. But he would say, "Okay, fine, let's do it. If I lose this fight, if Hanno loses, I'll be your slave and you'll get my gliders and everything I have, whatever it is." And so they fight. Of course, Hanno wins easily, destroys these guys, kills them, and then fast cut from there, from those bodies dropping and Hanno winning, to Macrinus going to that rich guy's house who demanded the money earlier that he almost stabbed. And he was like, throw him a sack of money and say, "Here's your money," and he'd walk away. So that's how Macrinus first makes it onto the stage and starts to make money. That's the start of Macrinus, and the start of Macrinus and Hanno's relationship. So I estimate Hanno's introduction that I talked about earlier to be about 20 minutes or 20 pages of script. I think this whole thing with Macrinus that I described so far. Could be done in probably 10. So it's 30 minutes so far of movie, which fits in perfectly with the expectations for Act 1. And we're at the end of Act 1 now. You could see that by focusing on Macronus's inciting incident, which is what all this is about. That moment when he sees Hanno and realizes Hanno is unstoppable and he thinks similar to himself, that they're like kindred spirits and they could both ride to the top, or rather, he could ride him to the top. That by focusing on that, it's focused his entire character. So now we have a real setup for how he was before, and it contrasts with how he is later. So, what do we do with Macronus going forward? Well, the obvious thing is he has to get richer and get more accepted into society. So, he started going to bigger and bigger events, bigger gladiatorial arenas where he would take his gladiators to fight. And he would go to like parties with rich people, richer people than he'd ever been with before. So, the first time he goes to a senator's house would be a big deal for him, the villa. Later on, when he finally gets invited to the emperor's palace, it would be a big deal for him. But in doing all this, you're trying to lead to the next stage in his development. And that's his second change. Because remember, Hanno had two changes. The first was the his wife being killed. But then later on, as the movie goes on, he has to realize that there's more than just getting revenge, right? He has to fight for the dream of Rome. And so Macronus has a similar change, where at the start, he just wants to get richer and get into the popular society, the rich people and stuff like that, and get accepted. But at a certain point, he needs to start seeing that that's not enough. He wants more. He wants to be at the very top, to be emperor himself. And he realizes he could possibly do it and get revenge on everybody, whoever wronged him. And there's two aspects to that. I think one is he has to learn or get an inkling that there's a plot against the emperors so that he could crush them and gain the emperor's trust, like he did in the movie. I thought that was a good move. But I would do it earlier, and he would actively ferret out the plot rather than them people coming to him and telling him. Like he would squeeze people for information and get it and then crush them. This would also place pressure on Hanno because Hanno would know about his mom and the general's plot. So he would see Macronus getting closer and closer to figuring it out. And so that would place pressure on him to maybe spring his assassination attempt before Macronus could get to them. So he's almost doing it to protect them. And of course, it has tragic consequences. The second thing that would help change his viewpoint is to realize that the two brothers, the emperors, don't really like each other. There's a cleave between them. They like hate each other behind the scenes. And so he would start to use that to undermine them and to take more and more power himself. So basically, this was already done in the movie. I thought those were the right moves, but they need to be done over a longer period of time throughout the middle of the movie. Like throughout the whole middle in Macronus' storyline should be leading down those two paths where he realizes there's a plot and that he could use that. And he realizes that the brothers can be manipulated and they don't like each other. I think I would keep him corrupting that senator that he does in this movie already. But instead of him just asking you want to bet and the guy says yes and then he loses and then double down and he loses again, like that was just a really stupid way to do it. Macronus needs to manipulate him. So let's say they're at a party, and Macronus asks him, "You want to bet?" And the guy's wife would be next to him, and she would jump and say, "No, no, no, he doesn't bet. We don't do that. We just make money off the purse, but he doesn't gamble." And so, from the way she says it and the way the man acts, we and Macronus would gather that the man had a huge gambling problem. So then later on, maybe later in this scene at the same party, or maybe in like a few scenes down the road, when Macronus has the guy alone without his wife, he would bring up the topic again. So how about we bet some money? You want to have some fun? Come on, all the guys are doing it. You should come. It'll be great. No big deal, right? You got the money. And the guy, being an addict, a recovering addict, would be like, okay, he's manipulated into it by Macronus. So Macronus corrupts him. The senator would be part of the conspiracy, just like he is in the movie right now. And so when Macronus bankrupts him and the guy can't pay him back, Macronus would demand information, and that's when he finds out. about the plot against the emperors. So that's Macrinus. I think now with this change, by focusing on his inciting incident, we've sharpened his character a lot and made quite a difference between what he is after that moment and what he does from that point on through the movie and what he was before. I think he's more interesting, more relatable, more charismatic, and more human, more understandable, which makes for a better character in general, but a better, more interesting villain. And perhaps most importantly, he's active. He's a bad guy at heart, out there doing bad things. And so this keeps the movie going. If you have a bad guy doing stuff, trying to achieve his ends and putting pressure on the other characters, then you can have a movie that's not boring, at least. And that was the biggest problem with this movie is you had static characters and you had a boring, static storyline and a boring movie. And so now by fixing Hanno and Macrinus, I think we're working with something. To answer the question, do I think this movie should have been made? And my answer is no, I don't think it should have been in the way it was done. Even if you fix the movie in the ways I indicated, I don't think it should have been done. And yes, I think my suggestions would make the movie better. Maybe even a good movie. Not great, I don't think, but good. But the problem is no matter how much you fix this movie while staying true to what they actually did, there's a huge problem that you can't get over, you can't get past. And that problem is Gladiator 1. In Gladiator 1, Maximus fights Commodus for the dream of Rome, for a Rome that is for and by the people and that respects human rights, essentially. At the end, when he dies, supposedly everyone's inspired and learns their lesson, and they're going to give power back to the Senate. Now, in Gladiator 2, it opens with not one, but two Commoduses, or Commodi, I guess you could say in plural. Two evil emperors, right? So it's twice as bad, basically. They have ultimate power. The entire city and all of society is corrupt. All the characters are corrupted. So basically, what they did is they took a giant shit on Maximus's face, on his memory, and on Gladiator 1 because he fought and died for nothing. Nobody learned anything after he died. This is only 16 years later, and things are as bad or worse than they were in part 1. So they negated Gladiator 1. They took a dump on it. And how can you make a part 2 without deleting part 1, essentially, and making Maximus a fool? That's the central problem with this movie. Not so much that Maximus, the main character in part 1, died and how you make a part 2 without the character. I think that's the problem everybody thought this movie would have, including myself initially. But the deeper problem is the memory of Maximus and the meaning of the movie is gone. But I do think there's an approach that would still honor part 1 and allow you to carry forward. And what I would have started with conceptually, maybe I haven't thought it through, but this is my instinct, would be you start writing part 2 by just accepting that what Maximus fought for, the dream that was Rome, has failed. And now what? I would have made Rome way more stricken than it is in this movie. Like I think there should have been constant rioting. There should be threats of civil war, and they should feel pressure on their borders. So they're having internal and external pressure. And Rome feels on the verge of falling. Another approach, which is kind of the opposite, but same principle in a way, is you start the movie with Maximus's plan being successful, where the Senate is in power and is ascendant. There would still be an emperor, but mainly he's kind of for show, or he listens to the Senate, and the Senate mostly has the power. But in the process of this movie, some force, some character or characters threaten to corrupt it again, to take it back into like a dictatorship. And so this version of the movie would be about the process of keeping a republic, the hard work necessary, because it turns out, according to this movie, that Maximus's dream of that republic, well, it's not actually a dream. It's hard work. It's hard work. A republic and democracy always have to be nurtured. You need vigilance. And so that would be the theme of that movie. But in either case, whether you take the view that you just accept the failure and move on, or you let it be a success, but it threatens to fall and you have to protect it, you're still accepting and acknowledging part 1 and you're building on from it. Whereas this movie was just a remake of part 1. They just had a weaker, waterier version of Maximus with Hanno. And instead of Commodus with Joaquin Phoenix, they split him in two. So they diluted him and made him two like crazy, wacky Joker type of figures. So basically they just did part 1 but worse. And that's absolutely the worst way to do it. And that's why nobody cared about this movie. No one liked it. Nobody wanted it. It was just not good. So that's what I thought about Gladiator 2. If you like this video, please tell your mom I said what up, girl.